Mama, let's start on a lighter note. Who is Mama Winnie Mandela? We've seen the story of this wonderful woman, a leader, a mother. How will you describe yourself?
No, Sophie, you are unfair. How on earth does one describe oneself? No, I leave that to my people to describe me. I've never been that vain. In fact, you know that over the years I've told you over and over again that it has never been about me, the person. I've never regarded myself as an individual. I'm just part of this whole liberation machine. I've never been an individual. So I can't describe myself outside of the collective. I belong to the collective. The African National Congress prides itself in the collectivity of the leadership of the ANC. And I have never been in a position to say I always talk about us as we, because I'm just part of the whole
collective.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 20 years down the line, we are marking 20 years of our democracy. That mission for liberation, how would you describe it? Where are we? Is it where you dreamed we would be when you joined this mission to liberate South Africa?
Well, I would be extremely naive if I suggested to you that South Africa of today is exactly what we dreamed of when we gave up our lives for the liberation of our people. It is no secret about the fact that we have problems. They are visible. We have extreme challenges which we didn't have at the beginning. You cannot compare the first dispensation with what is happening today. Originally, yes, it looked like we were going to achieve our beautiful dream. Yes, we were a miracle from the violence of the past. That particular part of the transition to a new democratic South Africa was wonderful. We achieved that. But in the process of doing so, there was naivety on our part. We were not experienced. We didn't know that political freedom was very easy. But political freedom without economic freedom is what has resulted in the challenges we face today. We did not accommodate that particular problem sufficiently because of our vicious past. We come from a very brutal period of our history, a history of a country that was segregated constitutionally. And it was in black and white. Society was divided into 4 categories, and of course I wouldn't bore you with what you know. And to transit from that era to where we are today has been a very painful journey. We made tremendous strides. We made great achievements, but at the same time, the difficulties we were confronted with, particularly in relation to the youth. As I've said before to Sophie, that unemployed youth in any country is a ticking time bomb. And I think the fact that we have the parliament we have today is a consequence of the problems I am talking about. It was easy to hoist the flag of freedom and say we were free at last. But then the economy still remained in the hands of the few. And the most difficult part has actually been transformation. We didn't realize how difficult it would be to get back our land because it was owned by the people who had oppressed us all those years, and we we had had such a violent history that we wanted to put an end to the armed struggle, difficult as it was. And we were not going to do land grab. We were going to see to it that we passed legislation that saw to it that we got our land back transitionally and amicably. But as you would know, the willing seller, willing buyer policy has not worked as much as many other policies have worked. We have passed a lot of legislation trying to transform South Africa amicably. But of course, the masses down there do not necessarily bother to think of the fact that it cannot be done overnight. And for a people who had been oppressed for so many years, you can't blame them for having been impatient with the leadership. And you can't blame them when they wonder whether this is the South Africa they fought for. And unfortunately, because of our history of our country, the pace is not as much as we would have wanted it to be, the pace of transformation.
Mama, you spoke about Parliament. When we look at what's happening currently in Parliament, we saw the incidents, you know, when during the session where there was kind of some behavior that are not of that should be displayed by leaders. Looking at Parliament currently, what are your comments?
Well, I think the leadership of our generation, although there are very few of us left now, we are bleeding. South Africa is hemorrhaging. Never in our dreams did we imagine that Parliament would be reduced to what we see today. No matter how angry we are at each other, there is no way that we can disrespect each other the way we did in Parliament. And I don't think there is a single South African that is proud of what is going on in Parliament. As a matter of fact, I think our generation is very ashamed of how the extent to which Parliament has degenerated, because it is an extreme challenge to our forebears and those who lead the country today. I don't think there's anyone who applauds what happens in Parliament today. And then there's no guarantee that we are going to see any improvement. We hold our breath each time the doors of Parliament open, because we just never know what's going to happen, what next will happen. And the rules of Parliament are flouted every day, and something has gone terribly wrong. And the senior leadership ought to introspect, and I think the African National Congress needs to go back to the drawing board, and we introspect and find out, where have we gone so wrong?
Mama, when you look at the senior leadership, we do have senior leadership, though very few. But at times when the leadership wants to help, and then there's suspicion, you know, how do we deal with that? How do we ensure that we tap into this resource?
I do not possess a magic wand which can guide the country as such. I think it goes back to the collectivity of the leadership I was talking about earlier. Surely there are still a few of us, the elders, in the African National Congress, and I think it is our responsibility to come together and find out where we've gone so wrong. What has happened to the leadership of the Lutulis, of the Tambos, of the Chris Hannies, you name them, of the Sisulus, the Duma Nokwes, the Lillian Gois, the Helen Josephs. Where is that leadership? I cannot tell you, as I'm sitting here, what has happened to us. Why have we failed to build that kind of leadership that would have maintained the status quo of our country?
Just a few weeks ago, we heard from President Jacob Zuma talking about an ANC that is in crisis. Would you share that view?
Oh, absolutely. And I admire him for admitting that we have a crisis in the country. And I think it is very big of him as president of the country to acknowledge that the ANC is in crisis. This statement has been made before by the Secretary General of the ANC. It's just that these statements get made and they don't seem to have any impact, and you don't get the analysts analyzing those people who've designated themselves, who've given themselves those positions of analyzing the political situation in the country. You don't get them assisting the country in analyzing those sorts of statements when a Secretary General of the ANC, a ruling party, stands up and says the African National Congress is imploding. He has said that before. And there didn't seem to be a follow-up to that statement. And I think if there had been a follow-up, a serious follow-up to that statement, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. There's a tendency to just make those statements and they don't seem to result in us going back to the drawing board each time such comments are made. But I admire the fact that we have come out of the culture of being very defensive. There was a time where when you, as a matter of fact, or even when you were a senior member of the ANC, and you made comments of that sort outside of Luthuli House, you were regarded as a counter-revolutionary. I think we have matured a great deal for the president to actually admit that the ANC is in crisis. And I hope that attitude continues, because then, in that case, we will be able to look at ourselves and revisit those policies and perhaps just go and investigate where we went wrong.
You led the struggle, but you also played a prominent role in kind of nurturing women, empowering women, fighting for the rights of women. 20 years, as my colleague has kind of indicated. Where are we? Why no senior woman leader in government?
I think there has been a deliberate stifling of the growth of the leadership. I want our movement when we went to Polokwane, when our previous president wanted to go for a third term. I warned then that that was the beginning of perhaps the worst tragedy in the history of our country. If you remember, there was a document I wrote then calling upon our presidents, the President Thabo, and the then Deputy President Jacob Zuma, to reconsider what was happening, what was beginning to happen at the time. There was a trend of labeling and creating divisions within the movement. For the first time, people like myself came across a language that said, so-and-so is a Jacob Zuma supporter, that one is a Taborite. That was unheard of before. we never had a Nelson Mandela follower and an O.R. Tambo follower. Once that kind of language began, there was never a stop. I warned them at the time. I spoke to the two leaders separately, and I did say to them, we were starting a process we would never be able to put a stop to. That they were going to divide the African National Congress, and that as the moment we came out of Polokwane, and that process had taken place where we tried to get a third term for our President Thabo and the then President Thabo and Deputy President, we would never be able to control that turning of the tide. It was a negative turning of the tide. I spoke to both of them individually, and each one of them said, Mama, you are saying that because you don't know that man. I spoke to my president, Deputy President Jacob Zuma. Said, Mama, I understand your sentiments, and I agree with you. There may be the danger of dividing the movement. And I warned, I said, you know, if you succeed, how are you not going to purge the people you will consider as Thaborites? Because it is human nature that you will feel unsafe if you have a cabinet that was the other president's cabinet. And he assured me, he said, no, that would never happen. And I went to President Thabo, and I made the same sentiments to him. By the way, it was Deputy President who first said, no, your problem is that you are Yazlis. And then you don't know that man. And then I spoke to the president of the time, and he said, no, I agree with you, Mama, you know. Normally in the line of things, it may sound plausible what you are saying, but then our husband says, you don't know that man. I said, is there something we don't know? What happened in Lusaka? It was the same question I posed to the president, deputy president. Is there something we don't know? What happened in Lusaka? Because this was unheard of in the internal wing of the African National Congress. We had worshipped the leadership in exile, and when you got an order, as Zinzi would agree with me, when we got orders from OR, it was as if you are speaking to him. We got orders from Lusaka. Those of us were in the underground. You literally stood at attention, being given a message by a messenger. Once OR's name was mentioned, you trembled, and you felt so honored that your leader outside had sent such instructions that you do 1, 2, 3, 4. And I expressed the same sentiment to these two young men. I said, what happened in Lusaka? The deputy president couldn't tell me. He said, perhaps one day I will tell you. And President Thabo said, perhaps one day I will tell you. So that's where things went so wrong, because obviously, I mean, it would be nonsense to suggest that, in fact, what I predicted then did not happen. All the ministers who served under Thabo, great brains. I needn't mention them by name because all of them were great. I can just make a few examples about women, for instance, Buyelwa Sonjika, Geraldine. They were great women, men, who served under Thabo. They were not reappointed.
But maybe the Women's League is going into its Congress this weekend. How do they reclaim that space? You know, especially with criticism that, you know, over the years they've lost that voice. Some have even said that it's been reduced to, you know, a women's desk of the ANC instead of influencing policy, influencing leadership positions.
I wish them luck. I really, truly wish them luck because, you know, as South Africa's politics, not even necessarily within the African National Congress only, it's a patriarchal society. It's so patriarchal that you can't possibly claim that we are really all equal. Women are still women. And I've always said when people venerate this wonderful South African Constitution, the best document of the century, and that South Africa has the highest representation of women in parliament. My view has always been that it is not the quantitative representation of women in parliament. It has never been about that. It is the qualitative representation of women in parliament. You can't take one of us from the backveld of Pondoland hoeing mealies on the fields there and put me in parliament simply because there has to be gender consideration. It doesn't work that way. It hasn't worked that way. It is true that to this day we look at ourselves and ask, who are those people in parliament? What is their track record? What are their struggle credentials? I, for one, have seen people, no, not that people should necessarily belong to our generation. During our time, there was no buying of branches, if we want to be ruthlessly honest. There was no buying of branches. We go to conferences today and you hear stories about buying branches because one needs to be voted into power in the national conference. Rumors of a creation of a whole lot of branches. People who have no idea about the African National Congress. I don't know what vetting system there is today. I am not necessarily as a grassroots as I used to be, safe to say I am in Soweto, and that satisfies me, the fact that I'm still with my people. So there are problems too about that kind of transition from a people's revolutionary movement to what the African National Congress is today. So if the women will revert to the African National Congress Women's League of the Lillian Goys, of Florence Mposhos, the Muriel Sodindas, I will applaud that.
Mama, turning to international news, Africa, just two questions on international. Your observation, I know you really follow information and news. In Africa, are we turning the tide on issues of poverty, malnutrition, but also on leadership and democracy?
I wish I truly had a good story to tell about my continent. We heard the president saying in Parliament on the opening of Parliament during the State of the Nation address, we have a good story to tell. I would concur with him if I physically saw that kind of transformation where we have a good story to tell about Africa. I am not sure if we can proudly say that we have achieved what we ought to have achieved in the last 20 years in Africa. Why would there be Boko Haram? Why would any structure, no matter how oppressed they claim to be, abduct 200 and something children, girls for that matter, and you say the political situation in Africa is right? So many things, so many tragic stories are happening in Africa. And I honestly cannot lie to you and believe that we have made tremendous progress. Yes, we have taken strides, but the history of colonialism makes us still bleed to this day.
And the last question from me on the international side, US, we saw the events recently where there's kind of some protest around how Africans are being treated or black people are being treated. Your message to the world on issues of immigration but also discrimination?
No, we all know that we have an extremely serious problem in that regard. It is very difficult to be critical without necessarily looking at the geography of our country, for instance. We have porous borders. When we took over, we removed the immigration officers that used to be at border posts, and we removed railway police who used to monitor crime in the trains. I honestly cannot vouch and say that we have an immediate answer at the moment, because a few years back we had an outbreak of xenophobia in South Africa that was unexplainable, and I think it is the worst tragedy that we are so narrow that we reduce xenophobia to black people. I've never heard of us demonstrating against foreign Italians, foreign Greeks, and foreign whites in this country. But we seem to be imploding indeed, Mandashe. We are imploding as Africans. Because why is it that now and again you will hear that Somalis are being killed and their shops are vandalized because, oh no, they are providing cheap employment and they are selling cheaper goods, and these people fled from their countries because of the political climate, whatever it is. We don't necessarily know what makes anyone pack their bags and come to South Africa, but it is always for a political reason, although of course we have lots of criminals who also take advantage of that fact. It becomes a problem to actually make pronouncements and say that it is all okay. It's not. We seem to need to go back to the drawing board on a lot of issues, especially such as the porous borders we have in South Africa. How do we control this type of flooding the country with foreigners?
Mama, it's the first time we are speaking to you after a very difficult year for you. If you could take us through just the journey of the past year as we mourned the death of Tata Mandela.
Well, I think death is difficult for any family, but it was particularly difficult for my children and the family because of Tata's status, not only politically, traditionally as well. It's been an extremely painful journey. It was not easy, and I felt particularly sorry for all my children, including children of the first marriage, Gadat. The rituals we had to follow at least satisfied us in the sense that you felt, well, we have mourned him. And it was also a period of letting our young people understand our culture and showing them how to respect our culture, because I believe when it comes to the question of death, we do go back to our tribal backgrounds, and because we are defined by our culture. For instance, here in my home, the children had to mourn until March, when we then went home to Kono to burn the buttons, the black buttons. And at that point, I also, to teach the young ones what culture is all about, I also went to my home, my traditional home in Ponoland, and attended a ceremony which is referred to as turning the duke, the scarf on your head. When you first mourn for the father of the children, you tie it on the left side. You make a knot to the side. And it is a black fabric referred to as ikia. And you see by the white thin lines, that is the traditional one. So I went home for it to be turned so that I could tie it here, traditionally. That ceremony was done, and during that whole period, you cannot go beheaded in public until we complete a whole year. So in June, on the 14th, and for a horrible coincidence, that was the day I got married in 1958, on the 14th of June. And I don't know why God does these things sometimes anyway. That was the day we went to take off the black clothes, and they are banned by the elders. But that is not the end of mourning the father of your children in my tradition. So after that, I then wore the African German print for the rest of the year until the 5th of December. And during all that time, you do not go bareheaded at all. In the homestead of your late husband, there are various beliefs that if you disobey the traditions, certain things happen to you in future. So besides the fact that in any case, whenever you are at your in-laws, no matter how old or young you are, if you are married into that home traditionally, you never ever go beheaded. On the 5th of December, as you would know, and I feel just so sorry for my children, that private ceremony of finally taking off izila, as we call it in our language, mourning, if you may. Then we attended that ceremony. Cow was slaughtered and sheep was slaughtered, and then we were cleansed by the tribe, so that we came back to our normal lives, and that's how I'm now dressed like this in my normal clothes. But I'm only bareheaded here in Johannesburg. I can never enter the Transkei bareheaded, either my home or where I was married.
As a last question, Ma, I mean, I'm sure even at the time you were able to see some of the stories that have been coming out in the media regarding, you know, yourself and maybe the family, and, you know, how did that affect you as the family?
Not at all. I'm not affected at all. I think it's a way of life. No family doesn't have its problems. I was not affected at all. I was just very happy that on such occasions we were extremely united. There was no such a thing as any divisions which are exaggerated in the media. My children and the children of Mama Evelyn are the same, and because she has passed on, Magaziwe is mine, and I will observe that culture to my dying day. She's my daughter.
And finally, your message for South Africans, Christmas and New Year.
Am I the right person to give that message? Well, I honestly wish every South African a Merry Christmas and a glorious New Year, and I pray that we overcome our political problems. I pray that we are helped to effect drastic changes in how we are leading this country. I pray it will be a period of introspection by all the leadership and revisiting the policies that have let down the masses of this country. I pray for a united COSATU. I pray for COSATU and Dumo to bring back NUMSA to the drawing board, and I hope they get united. And somewhere along the line, ridiculous as it may be, I hope to bring back Julius, to bring him back home one day before I sleep forever.
You love him?
I love all my children. I love all my children. The fact that we have political differences is immaterial to me.
Thank you for your time, Mama. Thank you so much for being SABC.